Sid,
Suitor, what up, baby?
what's poppin', my man?
How we feeling? You sound like you just rolling out of bed.
it's it's a slow start on a Sunday.
I feel that, man. I feel that. So before we start, bro, I'm recording. Is that cool with you? I'm not gonna post anything that you're not comfortable with, but I've just kind of been
Yeah,
using
of
these
course.
conversations as content, man. So
Yeah,
I think it's been helpful for people's. And then obviously when I'm back in Chicago, definitely want to sit down and just get you on the podcast to talk about like life. You know what I'm saying? When it's just not as fucked up.
right. Which we'll see when that actually is, but totally, I'm all for it.
Honestly, cool. So I kind of wanted to start with after like the George Floyd thing went down and the protests and the riots started going on. I was like definitely upset. I was like, man, I'm upset, and I was confused. I didn't know how I was supposed to be feeling. And I remember being like, yo, I'm angry, right? And then a lot of my friends were like, yo, I'm angry too, but like they were like pissed, like a lot of my black friends were like pissed and like angry and stuff too. And then all of a sudden, like I'm on Instagram and I see you and you're just fucking like enraged. I was like, damn, like we're mad, but Suit's really fucking mad, bro. I was like, he's
Yeah,
so angry, bro. So I kind of wanted to like get your perspective and just like what kind of triggered that and what made you so upset,
yeah.
man.
Um, it kind of it kind of all just fell into place. It didn't feel like I did anything out of the ordinary to make what happened happen so far, but like honestly it really started with a conversation with my direct boss at work on Friday. Like, I don't know how many days that was after George Floyd was murdered, but that was before the protests and riots really got going. um was a simple conversation with my boss, and hearing, like, I mean, it came down to me really not understanding how African Americans live in this country and how they think on a day-to-day basis to maintain their safety and maintain their position in this life, in this world and life. And hearing firsthand accounts from my coworkers on um, what they teach their kids about the police and how to act in front of police is something that I've never had to have a conversation about, and I didn't even know that existed. And that was like, man, that's pretty fucked up. Like, why didn't I know that? For one,
Yeah.
and two, like, how is that a thing in 2020 that people have to live in constant fear? Like, so that was stirring inside me all weekend after a conversation with my boss and hearing about how he talks to his kids and what his thoughts were on the situation. I was like, wow, that really fucking sucks. Like, fuck that. I'm sorry if I contributed to that in any way. I don't know if I did, but me not speaking out against that would feel like a crime at this point, because this is fucking ridiculous.
Yeah.
Um,
So let me
but
ask you this: like when it went down, did like your boss like, hey man, like let's have like a team meeting? Like, do you guys have any questions for me, or like did you go to him, or was like how did that kind of go? How did the conversation start? Because that's always something that's like really uncomfortable because like how somebody is like feeling like you don't really talk like especially being like dudes we don't talk about feelings, right? And I know you come from a football background too. It's like
no,
you can't cry on the field, you know what I'm saying? So leave all that soft shit at home. So how'd you
well,
kind of bring up that conversation?
yeah, we come from a football background, but even beyond that, my parents are immigrants from Lithuania. So
Oh,
my
okay.
parents grew up with Russia and the USSR occupying in a communist state. So there was no love lost there. It was called Eastern European love out there.
Yeah.
So feelings are hard to come by. But no, it was me being comfortable enough to be uncomfortable and know that it wasn't by any means a straightforward conversation. Like, I had to eke out what I was saying, and I had to, like, try to toe it to just like make sure I felt like I wasn't um crossing any lines or whatever, but like it it felt uncomfortable to ask the questions, and it probably was equally as uncomfortable to have to talk about it to someone who doesn't understand. But after having done that, it was a complete eye opener for me, and it seems like that's one of the benefits of social media, at least these days, is that conversation's happening with different folks who probably wouldn't have had that conversation before.
Yeah, for the
Um,
public, for like the whole world to see those conversations.
right, and the injustices that are occurring are being absolutely spotlighted right now across all forms of social media, which maybe happened in very small pieces before, but I've never seen anything like what we're seeing these days. So it only adds to the, if you're not talking about it, then what are you doing?
Yeah.
Like why would you remain silent when the entire world's having a conversation about it right now?
Yeah, just ask the questions, man. Just be like, how, what's going on, you know? Because I feel like everybody in the world right now, we're dealing with, like you said, unprecedented times, especially in like my time, right? Like my short life that I've lived. And it's just like,
You
I've
and me
never
both.
seen anything like this. So when I'm looking around, there's so much to where like, oh, we can have an open dialogue and open conversation now. Fuck, man, I got a lot of questions and I got a lot of stories that I've been waiting to tell. And like now I have the opportunity to, man. I would love for you guys to hear some of this, you know?
Yeah, and then I think it was the weeks kind of all blend at this point. I don't know what's going on. 2020 has been the weirdest
Yeah,
year
2020 sucks,
on
bro.
my in my life. But on Monday, um, we had a we had a global call. This was after the first set of riots, and had coworkers. Normally, we just have our update of what's going on in the world, how markets are reacting to it, what to think about, what to talk about, and that entire 45 minutes was dedicated to continuing the conversation on the racial injustices going on and what people are talking about and what they're doing about it. And heard from a couple of my coworkers on how they just more stories about how they live their life, and these are things that I had no clue about, like how one of my coworkers drives 30 minutes each way to a public track to work out in the morning before work so as to not feel unsafe and feel like people think they're being suspicious because they're running through their neighborhoods, which is completely
What?
fucked up, and had no clue that people actually have to do that to feel safe in this country.
Yeah, I've never heard that. That's crazy, man. That's heartbreaking.
Um, yeah, it's off. I was literally in tears sitting there listening to this on Monday morning. Um, and then other folks in my line of business that they they dress and think about consciously think about the way that they dress at a cocktail party so as to not come off as a waiter or waitress. And it's just like I cannot believe a like I'm sorry because that's completely fucked up and I didn't even know. So uh, if nothing else, talking about it is going to raise a lot of awareness and make people check themselves. I hope on either the privileges that they have or the fact that other people aren't in that position and probably should be from an equality standpoint. Um, and B, it's just like this has to end. Like, why is this happening right now? And it was at that point that I was like, all right, I'm done. I'm done talking about it. I want to see change, and I want to be a part of that change, and I want to be a force for change. So it really started with a random group chat with my friends, just kind of like everyone was pissed off and everyone was saying different things and being outraged in different ways. And I was like, and I was almost taking some heat for like as being as much of an advocate. They were all like, "Well, what are you doing about it? Like, we can all talk about it. What are you doing about it?" And I was like,
Fucking
"Damn,
now
all
I gotta
right.
do something.
So I do need to do something about
Yeah.
it." So then I asked them if I researched and found an organization that I thought was doing a lot of good in this world and trying to make immediate change and making an immediate impact on taking steps towards equality and justice in this world, would you donate? And they're like, hell yeah, I would. So found Campaign Zero, which
What do they do?
these guys were the three founders, or at least some of these three founders were on Obama's 21st Century Police Task Force back when he was the president, and they've out of this organization was born out of the Ferguson riots of 2015, and they're dedicated to researching and finding data-driven policy solutions that every police organization across the country can put in place to drastically reduce or potentially eliminate police violence and brutality in any form. And there's 8 measures that they've specifically found, which you can find on their website, that are implemented in pieces across the country at different police departments, but very few, if any, have implemented all of them. And if they did, there's statistics that show that there would be an overwhelming majority of cases like Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and the ones that we don't see, be reduced to the point of hopefully being eradicated, and being that kind of small step towards making a horrible situation hopefully reduced or go away in the future. So
are these the 8? I'm gonna read them off to you because I think I just googled them. Is it ban chokeholds and strangleholds? Require de-escalation. Require warning before shooting. Requires exhaust all alternatives before shooting. Duty to intervene. Ban shooting at moving vehicles. Require use of force continuum. Require comprehensive reporting.
Yep, that's it right there. And it's really interesting to have been doing what I'm doing over the course of this week, because already changes are being made because of the awareness that Campaign Zero is doing to let people know in their own cities which of these policies have been implemented and which aren't, and how to contact the right folks to make sure the changes are made. So I've already seen cities like Minneapolis, and I think even where we live, Chicago, add a few of these very immediately to their policies for police. So it's something that it's probably hard to immediately measure when these changes are put in place, but advocating for these and knowing that they've done the research and they've looked into what needs to be done, we'll see that change going forward.
Yeah. So
so what I was doing was just like, I figured out and realized that I work at a company that matches donations to 501c3 organizations and accredited ones. And I knew that some folks did and others didn't, but what really triggered the match program thing, or the matching idea, that is now what we've got almost 11,000 going towards, is one of my friends said on Instagram that they were going to match people's donations to whatever organization they choose for 24 hours, which that's wild in its own right. That's completely selfless to be able to do that. But then we were like, well, then why don't we take this a step further and just collect donations from people hold ourselves completely accountable when we're doing it, and have complete transparency in the process, but use people's a few people's company donation match programs to be able to leverage that for anybody who does or doesn't have that at their own company, and make sure that everybody who donates has their dollar maximized from a donation standpoint, to be able to be as effective of a dollar donated as possible. So at minimum, as it stands right now, we'll have close to $22,000 donated to Campaign Zero here in a few weeks' time, and
That's from like 2 weeks of work, right?
hoping for more. Hoping for more, because some of these companies do 2-to-1 matches, and there are some that people don't necessarily work at that I know of, but there are even 3-to-1 matches, which means for every dollar you donate, they donate three, which
shit.
means $4 total dollars are donated. So if I can find a 3-to-1 for all of this and speak for all of this, then we're looking at something like $44,000 donated to Campaign Zero from just a couple posts, a couple texts, and me. Like, people are applauding what I'm doing, which is nice and all, but I'm not doing anything that anyone else wouldn't have. I'm just really collecting. I'm facilitating and focusing people's good intentions on action, because it's easy to feel something in this moment and say something about it, and then watch it settle down over probably a couple months, and then call it quits and never have done anything about it other than a passive post. And I was just trying to focus at least my circle of friends and influence that I can towards doing something, and it seems to have worked, because never in my life did I think we were going to raise $11,000 in a week
Yeah, it's insane.
For something like this.
First I want to applaud you, man, for I think that's one of the most difficult things to do in life is to talk about something, to have a feeling about something, but then actually take the steps to realize a vision, like see that thing come to life and be like, yo, this is a problem. This is the world I want to see. What can I do to do it? Okay, this is what I can do to do it. And then you start taking those steps, and then also getting other people to see that vision too and jump on board. So I applaud you 100% for that. The other thing that you brought up that I kind of want to touch on is it's weird hearing you talk about how black families have to educate their kids about the police, because I didn't realize, like, until you said that, I didn't realize that was a thing that everybody kind of wasn't educated on. Like when I started driving, like both my mom and my dad, right? And my mom, who's white, my dad's black, were like, all right, so if you get pulled over, keep both hands on the wheels, right? And then when you go to, like, when the officer asks for your license and registration, say to him, sir, I'm gonna reach in my glove box and I'm gonna pull out my license and registration. Is that okay? You know what I'm saying? And I just assumed that was something that everybody was being trained in. I didn't realize that it was like a racial thing until you kind of just mentioned it. So it's like wild that you should say that, because I think it goes both ways. Like, we didn't realize that, like, I didn't realize that was a thing, and I think a lot of, like, black people growing up don't realize that's a thing.
I think it's hit or miss among whites, but it's almost, from everything I've heard, it's just like normal course of conversation. It's sad, but African Americans have to de-escalate themselves, and they have to actively think about de-escalation with the police, because everything that they've seen and been taught so far out of the police in this world is that they won't de-escalate themselves, and they'll put blacks in really tough situations and lethal situations, which is completely messed up and not okay. And I myself have had that conversation of, like, being a de-escalator with police, but it sounds like my parents were the exception to the idea, at least for white people. But yeah, it's just like, well, that's one part of it, but, like, now if you have a 8-year-old or a 12-year-old or a 15-year-old, how do you explain what's going on in this world, and how do you talk to your kids about it, and how do you get them aware now of the differences that are happening, and what people are really protesting for and rioting for. And it's a difficult conversation in any direction, no matter what, in recognizing that um, tough tough stuff is going on, and it's going to continue to unless we move towards change and actively decide to change this, which I've never seen anything like it, but it really feels like something's moving here.
Yeah, I agree. So I got a question. So I was talking to my mom and my dad and my little sister last night, and one of the things we were discussing is like from the police perspective. Let's just take the police perspective for a second, right? People hate the police right now. So who in the world would want to be a police? And the way we're kind of having an argument about it, where police officers are being portrayed in the media as like the villains, as the bad guys, and people are basically like spitting at them, calling them names, treating them like dog shit, right? So from like the police perspective, they're literally walking through the world probably as like a dark skinned black man would be walking through the world right now, like hated just because of the way they look, right? Just because you have the
Yeah,
badge on, right?
yeah,
So literally what happened is like my mom, my sister like to use like a ton of statistics. So they were saying that they've actually lowered the standards of testing for police because the supply of people who want to be police officers, and rightfully so because you're getting a ton of hate for it, has decreased so much. So they continue to lower the standards for acceptance for being a police officer. But the problem is when you think about it, you're gonna start to get like shittier and shittier people in, right? And that's harmful. So like the more that we hate on police, the more that people aren't gonna want to do it, and the more good people will fall through the cracks. But simultaneously, I bet you there will be some like good people who are like, I'm gonna step up and improve the police force by going into the police force, right? But like, what is and I was trying to
right.
put my head around some ways like how could we possibly um, improve the police force from within? Like what are some steps that we can take to get the right people in? Because I think just from like you're a University of Chicago, right, guy? And one of the things that we talk about there is there's a difference between like the like law and ethics, right? So like how do we get people in with good ethics who won't take advantage of like the laws that are in place, right? Because the guy who
Hmm.
kneed on George Floyd's neck, he like theoretically he was obeying the law because he gave like the chokehold wasn't in the Minneapolis report, right? But since then the law has been changed. So how do we have
Right.
people with good ethics being like, yeah, this is the law, but morally it's still incorrect?
Well, yeah, and it almost goes beyond that. It's like what what uh, what was a popular conversation, an idea that sprung up over the last couple of days that I had immediately dismissed it for a second, but then thought about a little more, was this idea of defunding and abolishing the police system as it is. And when I heard that, I was like, do I hear that right? Can we live in a world without police? Like, there's no country on earth that does that. Like,
Yeah.
what are you guys talking about? Abolish the police. And it took me it took me asking at least five of my friends that had mentioned that on social media to then follow up with them and ask them like, hey, you need to help me understand this, because
I'm fucking
I
confused.
well, right, because I'm all for moving towards things that work and doing things that will get us towards equality and justice. But we're not. I don't think we're going to eradicate crime completely. So what are you talking about with this get rid of the police thing? And after some time talking with these guys, what I had come to realize and understand is the police, which as of right now I think there are around 800,000 of them, active police men and women across the country. A lot of them are getting called for situations that um, they arguably shouldn't be called in on. And it sounds like the majority of what they get called for is situations like um, somebody is contemplating suicide and is standing at the edge of a bridge. So somebody calls the cops 911, and the cop rolls in, and the guy's contemplating jumping, and you have an armed police officer with a gun trying to de-escalate an issue that they aren't really trained for and shouldn't be doing.
Yeah, it actually makes me more afraid. I'm
And
more likely to jump in that scenario.
right, well, yeah, right. And or a guy is overdosing on drugs. Someone calls the police, and
Should be the EMT.
armed police officers show up to help a guy who's overdosing when that's not really their responsibility or jurisdiction. But
Yeah.
everybody knows to call the police in any situation, right or wrong, and good or bad, and for right reasons and wrong reasons. But part of what it's a catchy word to use, abolish the police and whatnot, but it speaks to transforming the way that our country responds to different types of crises and getting the right people involved. Like if someone's suicidal and considering jumping off of something, you would want a mental health expert there or some sort of psychotherapist having a conversation with that guy in the moment. Like cops aren't trained for that, and nor should they be. But then that gets to, if they're getting called for that more often than a violent crime, and if they respond to violent crimes after they've already occurred, like how many situations do you really need an armed police officer for? Like giving someone a speeding ticket arguably doesn't require having a gun on you. So it's getting to the idea that we can transform the police and law enforcement system by not making every situation that pops up require an armed police officer to show up. There are different civilians and social services out there in existence that if we properly funded them and focused efforts in a different direction, we'd have a better blend of people that are ready and willing to help others that are in tough situations.
That's
So,
interesting, man.
yeah, and that's something that I just like. It snowballs. Like I don't know, for one reason or another, I really wasn't part of the race conversation before, but this all obviously stirred me to the point of there's no fucking way I can be silent on this issue and just be silent. So I got involved, I got active, and I want to be part of the change. So then being active and being a part of it led me to have that conversation, because while Campaign Zero is trying to sharpen up the police in every way possible, there's other people that are taking it a step further and saying, while that's helpful, and it certainly is, and this is something that Campaign Zero very recently changed their stance on too, or not changed but evolved their stances. We want to help in the immediate term, and we want to make changes now because they'll help. But defunding police systems to the point where we can use other social services around to help help better in different situations remains the goal. And I thought that was powerful, and it gets to what you're saying of there should be higher standards for police, and it should be an honorable position, but as of right now, it's probably one of the least coveted employment positions that I can think of.
Yeah.
And from a social standpoint and from a public hate standpoint, but if we redirected funding to the point where it becomes again a high bar to become a police officer, because we don't need as many police officers because there's better ways to handle different situations, then we might be able to raise that moral bar that you were talking about with standards to police hiring.
Yeah, that's interesting, man. So like now my mind's kind of spinning, right? To where what you're saying makes a ton of sense to me. You need the right people in the right situations for given the emergency that's occurring, right? Like if a fire is happening, you don't want a police officer there, you want the firefighters there, right?
Yeah,
If you have like someone
same
jumping
idea.
off a bridge, you want like a social service mental health expert there. If you have a hostage situation, like obviously you want a negotiation specialist there, right? But generally, we just standardize the way that we standardize the way that we respond to emergencies, and then we standardize the way that the people who are trained to handle those emergencies, right? Like the police is standardized in one way, right? But now I'm thinking about it, like you should have multiple or different police with different specializations, right? Like when you have a basketball team, they're not all shooters, you know. So why would you
Yeah,
have like a and that's maybe like an outlandish example, but like so why would you have a police force all dealing with one type of emergency? So I think 100% you're right. You defund the police, or you fund it in a different way. You cause resources to like they all have like a basic standardized training, but then you specialize. You specialize within like this is our guy for this situation. This is our guy for this emergency. This is our guy for this emergency, right? It's like a hospital. They're not all brain surgeons. Some of them have to be heart surgeons. Some of them have to be like pregnancy doctors and gynecologists, etc. Right? But then the question is that requires society to be able to change along with the police force. That requires society to know what situation they're
hmm
dealing with, be able to correctly handle the situation that they're dealing with, right? And then have the police force ready and trained to come in and handle that emergency situation. But then I think you're right. If that happens, the result of that will be that the police will be in honorable position again because they're specializing and we're getting the most honorable men because the supply of men won't will be men and women apologies men and women will be higher, right, for a lower like the supply demand economics will balance out.
right. Yeah, it's like, well, and there's other situations too. Like, do you need an armed police officer um, being called in when there's a school fight and like when two kids go at it at school? Like, you probably don't need an armed cop to de-escalate a school fight,
Yeah.
but we've gotten to the point where that's normal for us to think that if there's a fight, the cops get involved, and then you get to the situation of like, well, what's a cop trained to do? Handcuff a guy and send him to jail and stuff like that. So a kid could, because of a school fight and because there's no other resources available to calm the fight and get to the root issue and figure out what's going on there and help the kid. If there's a fight, then it's charged as a crime and the kid goes to jail and starts a ridiculous cycle, especially if you're black, of being treated unfairly in the judicial system and potentially starting a long life in a bad cycle of going to jail all because you got in a school fight. That happens all the time.
Yeah, you got a record.
And that,
Yeah.
yeah, and that situation doesn't need to be solved and handled by an armed cop. It's just kids fighting. Like they're
They're
little kids. It
kids.
happens. But
Yeah.
there's countless situations where police are used and involved and make decisions when there's probably someone more specialized to be doing it, especially in 2020.
Dude, what you're saying there is so important, man, because I read this book called Emotional Intelligence, and the whole book is about how these fights are occurring in these like low socioeconomic areas because these kids lack empathy and they lack understanding and they're not able to see somebody else's point of view. But it starts from like young childhood, right? So when these like young kids are fighting, let's say they're like in high school and they're fighting, right? It's kind of I don't want to say too late to correct the behavior, but the behavior has been building up until that point, right? So I think you don't need an armed police officer right there. What you need is you need to send in you need to change like the education system to be like, hey man, like it's not about just learning IQ things here. It's about learning emotional intelligence here too. It's about learning like empathy for others because then if you can start at the root of the problem, the base of the problem, you don't have to go to the garden and dig out the weeds once the weeds have kind of taken over the garden already, you know? You can get them before
Yes,
they start to take out the flowers.
yes, and yeah, you're getting to the broader um, another piece of this very complex and huge puzzle to get us towards equality and justice is reforming the education system and getting people in historically poor communities equal access to opportunities that folks in better cities and counties and all that have right now, and leveling the playing field for everybody so that they're not at a disadvantage from the get-go just because they happen to be born somewhere else than you were.
Yeah.
And that's a mountain to climb, and I really think that we're at the summit, and that people have actually decided to see this mountain for what it is and want to be involved in changing it, because it's all of that gets us to where we are in 2020, and why people are protesting and rioting. It's all these differences and all these situations that seem unjust and don't feel right. So why are we perpetuating it and letting it go on, either silently or passively letting it happen? And that's what it's all about, man.
Uh, I agree 100%. I want to take the conversation because I know that you're working in like a corporate office that's highly prestigious. So I kind of want to kind of take it to like the perspective of black people in the workforce now. And I was reading the paper today about certain actions and certain steps that we can take to make the boards more colorful, because they say that with the ESG movement going on, more women and more people of color at the table becomes exponentially more important, because the world isn't just, it doesn't look one way, but our boards and our
No.
companies, they do look one way, right? So what are some actions and measures you think that we can take in order to kind of change that? Because one thing they're talking about in the paper is a lot of people, they don't want to start taking the actions now because the payoff they're not going to see for like 10 to 20 years. Like if you start like a young program for like financial literacy in the cut or something, like those kids, they might not be able to work at your company for like 10, 15 years down the line, like once they're trained. So how do you get companies to like see the long-term benefits of making their boards more colorful?
that's a that's a great question, my friend. It's not an easy one to
Yeah,
answer.
sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. It's just something that kind of popped in my head because I don't know if you
Yeah,
guys were like talking
I
about it.
mean, I know that where I work, they've they've been in a fortunate position enough to be able to be a force of change in that direction. So they've, in terms of empowering underserved communities and getting education um, opportunities equalized and optimized everywhere, they've put hundreds of millions of dollars to work in communities to be able to affect that change, knowing that that change won't be seen in at their job or other jobs for decades. And that's just because we have a leader who understands the problems that we're facing and knows that he has an ability to be part of that change. But um, honestly, it comes down to having an awareness of it and wanting to do something. Like if your board is 90% white and you want it to be 60% white, or you want to represent more minorities because that's how it's represented in America, period, then you need to be that person saying, hey, I want to make these changes to our board requirements and have these kinds of seats because this is how it's represented in the world. And that's the way I think it should be. And that's what overwhelmingly people think that representation should look like. So I'm gonna vote and make sure that this happens. And it's incumbent on every single one of any kind of person in positions of power like that to recognize where they stand from a company standpoint and recognize where they want to be. And the unfortunate case is sometimes they don't want to be. And there's other unfortunate cases of like they don't even recognize it in the first place that it's a necessary thing. So there's a lot of education that each person needs to be doing on this topic to be able to then figure out ways to improve their company and other companies. But it really all starts with what we're doing right now, which is having a conversation about it and really understanding an issue and a situation more than just surface level, and seeing protests, giving a thumbs up, saying great, and then moving on. It's really digging into it and understanding what your biases are, why they were formed. Can you unlearn them? Were they the right things to be knowing in the first place? It's all these kinds of questions that you have to ask of yourself and understand what's going to be a factor for getting us closer to equality.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I agree with what you're saying, and one thing I think you're talking about too, that you mentioned that I want to hop on is like policies, right? So it's social media is kind of tough because everybody's has a ton of written words and a ton of like, this campaign's happening and this campaign's happening and donate to this people and donate to these guys, right? But I haven't actually had time to like research all of them. And hopping on the phone with you has been super helpful because you were able to explain like what Campaign Zero is to me in like the span of 10 to 15 minutes. And then it's like, okay, that makes sense. Like they probably deserve some money, you know? So one thing that I'm thinking about now is how can either politicians or activists um, basically say, hey, this is the law, this is how it works, and this is the policy change that we want to make, and then how can they communicate effectively that idea to go out to people? Because the way I'm looking at it is like there's just so much noise going on right now that you have to find a way to cut through the noise and be like, okay, like this is what needs to happen, and everybody needs to pay attention to this, and everybody needs to galvanize around that one idea or that one thing so that we can then become a force to do it. Because as long as people are scattered, shit's not gonna happen, right? So and I
Yeah,
noticed that you did it in a way where you were able to get like a lot of people to donate. People probably you don't even know who are just like sending you Venmo requests. You know what I'm saying? Like, yo,
total
yeah,
strangers.
that's what I'm saying. So how are you able to like touch more people than you know? Did you like just started a small circle, just reached out to like 2 3 people, and they reach out to 2 3 and it just kept growing, or like what is the way that politicians and activists can connect to more people and expand their network and their voice and their platform?
What I realized is you just need to make it as easy as humanly possible for somebody to get on board with what you're doing and what you're saying. And the way I did it was being as plain and simple with what my goal was, which is raise money for Campaign Zero. Here's what they're doing and why. If you care about this, do this one step, which I couldn't think of an easier way than send one Venmo, open up the app and send a few bucks to be able to contribute to that change, and know that because you Venmoed, your dollar will stretch farther than it will having actually directly donated to them. And it was just connecting very simple dots and making the act of being part of change as simple for somebody as possible, decrease any kind of friction you can possibly do to, and decrease as many steps as possible to eliminate any more time needed for somebody to actually act to change. And that resulted in what we have going right now for Campaign Zero, which is great. And how that extends to the voting system. That's a tough one to tackle because there were 100 million people that didn't vote last year in the presidential election, and now here we are 4 years later, and we're a couple months away from another election. And I would think that everything that's stirred up in this country over the last 4 years is enough reason to get people to vote this year, but I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. And the changes that people want in their police force and changes that people want in their own counties and cities require voting in those cities for mayors, for governors, for county officials. And that's something that I think for at least people our generation, there's a disconnect there, because I don't know how many of us actually vote in those city and state county elections. Um, but my my advice, if I were to be able to give advice in this situation, is make it as accessible and easy for people on the margin to be able to see what a candidate's positions are, why they're running, what they're trying to change, what they want to change, and make it as easy as possible to vote for them in that situation. Like, it's 2020, and I refuse to believe that you need to physically show up somewhere to cast a vote so that your vote can be counted. There's so many friction points there that would then cause along the way somebody to stop and not actually go and vote. And at the same time, people are looking at their phones all day, every day. Like, that's probably not something that's going to change for better or for worse. So you might as well adapt to it and figure out how you can work with it. And if you can digitize that kind of activism and movement and legislation and voting system, I think we'd be in a much better spot, at least from a participation standpoint.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense, man. Like 100%. Like why can't I vote on my phone? Like why can't I just press a button and like look at all the laws and just do it on my phone? Like you just plug in your social security number, right? And then you just have access to like being able to vote. Or like another example is like go ahead.
You can press 3 buttons and have a very finely made product shipped from all over the country sent to you in a matter of 2 days, but we can't vote for our mayor with the same steps. It doesn't really add up to me. It doesn't make
Yeah.
sense why that's not an option.
Yeah, I agree, right? Like or like another thing is like why don't we necessarily get a say? Like there's like the J. Cole song, just like how about you just build an app where I can just like press a button and decide where my taxes are gonna go, you know?
Right.
Like that would be like another like example of something that could change, that would be great. Right? But I think what you said, man, was just so incredibly important, and it kind of just like clicked to me is um how do I explain? People are lazy, right? So if there's a problem that you want to solve and you have this dying need to solve this problem and you have a ton of energy in you to solve this problem, make it so fucking easy that the laziest person in the world can do it, dude. Literally, it's just,
Right.
hey man, all you have to do is this. This is the steps, 1, 2, 3, and then you're done. And you can say that you were part of the change, and you can go tell your friends at the cocktail party, yeah, man, I did this. I was part of this big movement that happened, you know. And it was easy as 1, 2, 3, right? And then the person who they tell at the cocktail party, they're just like, oh, all you have to do is 1, 2, 3. Man, I'm gonna do that 1, 2, 3. I want to be a part of that
Yeah.
too.
Send me that link, because I'm on my phone as it is, like everybody else, and
Yeah.
I'll do that too, because that's easy.
That makes so much sense to me, dude. It's just like, okay, you have to realize that people have this like barrier and this like activation energy that's required. So if you can just lay out the steps for them and make it so simple, then it's there's no reason not to do it. You know?
Yeah, and
Um
like when I was doing what I was doing when we were working on raising money for Campaign Zero, if I had if I had one way that Venmo could connect to Instagram, where somebody could click on that Venmo, that handle that they see in stories and whatnot, and actually that would pull them from Instagram to Venmo, I, I think it probably would have doubled the donation, just because you've eliminated one step of you have to yourself exit Instagram, you have to yourself find Venmo, type it all in, etc. But it's kind of like the Amazon effect. Just make it as like reduce as many steps as humanly possible to get somebody to purchase something, and they'll do it. And Amazon figured that out. But purchasing stuff isn't the only thing that occurs that should be occurring in this world. Voting should be,
yeah.
and donating and doing those kinds of things should be. So Amazon affecting the way that other parts of this world operate it should remain a goal because it's obviously something that works.
Well, dude, here's the thing, right? So Amazon is a for-profit company, but like voting and stuff is run by the government. And if I'm thinking about it just from like an American perspective, and I'm trying to live the American dream, generally Americans are going to be selfish and they're going to do the thing that's going to get them paid the most, right? So if I'm a sick engineer and the choice is between going to Amazon and getting like 250 to like 400K a year, or working for the government and getting like 125 to like 150 forever, like because that's how the benefits for the government work, right? I'll probably choose like the Amazon route because it's just like, do I want equity or do I want bonds? There's a reason that equities have the most money versus like fixed income well, that's not true. Equity has the most money from like retail people versus like fixed income assets, right? So what about like a situation where you could like I don't want to say require because that seems like forceful by the government, but basically say like, hey man, you guys got some engineers. How about instead of donating funds to us, how about you donate some hours to us, right? How about you donate some hours to come build this platform for us that will make everybody better, and in exchange we'll give you some type of like subsidy from your taxes, or like, you know, like the way that donations get a subsidy, like hours get like a subsidy, like once you build this project.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's from that standpoint, I agree with everything you're saying, and it's gonna take somebody who's already in a government official seat to recognize that this technological transformation of the voting system is necessary and is going to help, and they fund it with government. We're already paying taxes for this and that, and plenty of things that we probably don't agree with. But if we were able to start something within the government that said, hey, we're going to shift our voting technology to go digital because it's 2020, and we're going to staff this correctly, and we're going to incentivize people, good engineers, good software engineers and technologists, to want to work on this project, and it's going to require good salaries to be able to find the right people to want to make this possible. I think it's in the government's ability to do so. I don't know. It's getting to what you're saying. Like, people want to get paid as much as possible for the skills that they've acquired over their lifetime, which is completely fair because it's how the world works. But acts of nobility and altruism isn't completely lost. So if there are people out there that can be that kind of force with those skills, it's going to be recognized. Maybe not immediately with your week to week paycheck, but if you're able to say, hey, I was actually the lead engineer on transforming the nation's voting system to digital platforms so that more people can get involved in voting.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be universally applauded by folks and recognized in other ways than just a dollar in your bank account.
I agree. I think the two things on that. One, the government actually competes with top engineers for like top coding engineers from like the Valley and stuff. And what they do is they basically put them on like the defense budget, right, to go like build weapons and stuff. So I'm willing to bet that the talent is there. You just got to be like, hey man, also you got to go build that platform too. You know, and we'll give you like a couple extra bones or something. Because the government theoretically has like unlimited dough. Like you're watching Powell just like throw money at everybody. Like, yo, you get $1 million. You know, like, so it obviously doesn't really mean anything. You might as well just pay that guy a couple extra bucks to go do that, right? But
the government's got the best couch you can possibly find to reach a hand in and pull some extra cash out when you need it.
It's unlimited, man. But
yeah.
I think the last thing that you said is like the perfect way that I kind of want to end this, man, and it's so important to where people have confused the American dream with getting the most points, right? If life is a video game, we're trying to get the most points, and it's not necessarily about the most points, bro. It's about the best story. You know what I'm saying? It's like, Because at the end of the day, like, it's like, yo, like I worked at a cube for like hours and hours and hours and then made a ton of money. Everybody's like, cool, man, wouldn't want to live that movie, you know? But like
No.
if you write a story in your book that's so incredible that people are just like, man, that person was amazing. You know what I'm saying? They might not have had like the most money, but they were an amazing human being. And when they go down in the grave, like I will forever remember their story. That's fucking so special and so important. I think, and I wish more people did exactly like you said. I wish more people realize that when you go to a cocktail party, instead of being like, hey man, can I buy you a drink and check out my cool Rolex, being like, hey, like I made this great change. I made this great change and I made your life better. And it doesn't consist of me just like buying you things so that you'll love me. You know what I'm saying? It consists of me actually giving love to you and creating this great thing for you, right? To make your life easier and better so that you can go then create and give love to somebody else, man. I think you hit it right on the head, dude.
And yeah, and I couldn't be more with you on that. And there's actually research that would speak to that effect. Like psychologists have researched this idea of how much money do you really need to be happy in this world?
72K, right?
Right. And it's something in the ballpark of $72,000, which a lot of people can get to that. Almost everybody can get to that dollar over the course of that dollar amount over the course of their lifetime.
Yeah.
And if you're maxing out at happiness from a dollar standpoint at that dollar level, then why are you grinding so hard to just keep adding dollars when you know in your heart, deep down in you, that there are other passions that you have that make you happier, that you can be doing while you're earning that dollar amount, and potentially it goes to help other people. Maybe it's just for you, but there are so many ways to be happy in this world. So being the fact that people are miserable in their jobs is, and then pushing out that hateful energy because of how much they hate their jobs to other people around them, and becoming myopic on making as much money as possible because they're actually depressed about their jobs and how they're not actually doing anything with their lives is shocking to me. That it's shocking because some people never recognize that. Some people recognize it late and make changes. And the people that I'm most jealous of in this world are the people that figure it out from the get-go, that they can do what they want in this world, and that money's going to come and go, but it's just a medium. It's not really there for anything.
Yeah.
And it doesn't the dollar amount that is attached to you doesn't mean anything from a human standpoint, and doesn't value you as a human any way than anybody else. And it's that kind of stuff that gets me fired up. It's funny that we're ending on that, but that's the kind of conversation that fires me up, because there's so many ways people can improve themselves and working and improve the situation around them and be generally a happier human being. It starts with just understanding that money's not always the motive. Like it's not that.
Dude, well, I mean, 100%. You know, I agree with you. I know that you're trying to be an entrepreneur. I've been going to those, like, we ran into each other at that booth conference. You know what I'm saying? So I just want to close up by saying, like, I've loved being your friend, bro, through the years. I'm watching you turn into a fucking incredible human being, an incredible man, and keep doing what you're doing, bro. And then when I get back, let's go do some bar trivia. We need that in our life.
I love it, Squid. And same to you, my man. I'm impressed with everything that you're doing, and putting yourself out there like this is something that very few people do, but it's recognized every time it occurs. And I want you to know I'm proud of what you're doing here.
Cool, man. I appreciate that. It's exactly like you said. Like, I found some shit that made me happy, and I just want to double down on it.
Yeah, and it's one thing to say it, and it's a completely other thing to do it. And I'm proud of you for doing it.
But you've experienced that too, man. It's one thing to say that you want to change, and it's another thing to build like an entire donation campaign and donate the money and get all your employers to match it. You know what I'm saying? Like we're a rare breed, bro, and you want other people to be in this like this circle. So it's just like waking them up and being like, yo, you guys can do it too. Like, we're ordinary fucking dudes.
Yeah.
You
I
know.
hear you, my man.